At one point, I just fell to my knees and I told God, I said, you can have this miserable life if you'll take it. It is a mess. If you'll take the mess of this life, you can have it. In Christ, I don't even know who you are, but I'm asking you to come, to live in me, to do in me whatever you want to do in me. And to my great surprise, he did. He did.
Sons, welcome back. I know it's been a while since we've had a podcast, and there's reasons for that, but the Lord's been on me. Hey, let's have another conversation, and I am super excited. I've actually been holding out. I've got a couple podcasts that are recorded, but before any of those were released, I really wanted to try and convince this friend of mine that I was introduced to a couple years ago into having a couple of conversations, because this is one of the holy divine gifts that God gives to us. Once we begin seeing ourselves as sons, what he sends us is men who will father us and help us to move from one stage into the next until we ultimately see him face to face. And one of those rare gifts is when God gives you men who have lived a lot more life than you have. And they're able to answer in these very articulate ways, truths that just cut straight to the heart. And a few years ago, I was introduced to our guest on the podcast today, Jim Barker, by a friend of mine named Dustin Burrell, who brought his son on one of our first tracks, Father-Son Adventures. He had a great experience, and shortly after that, he said, Jay, I've got somebody that has really blessed me, that has come alongside me and has using some of the new language that we're becoming more familiar with. He said, this guy has fathered me in ways that God knew that I needed fathering, and I think you need to meet him. So welcome to the Being Sons podcast, Jim. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a joy to be here.
So Dustin said, yeah, you need to meet with this guy. And so you and I had coffee at Black Rifle. Yeah, coffee. And to tell you the truth, because I just think this is funny, I just look back and I think you bought me a coffee, and you just got a black hot coffee. And my generation doesn't often order just black hot coffee anymore. We've been seduced into the dark side of sugars and creams and all this other stuff. And I thought, well, you know what? I want to be like this guy. So it was probably the first cup of black hot coffee that I'd had in forever. And there was something that made me feel like I was with Phil Robertson, from Duck Dynasty, who I know would have just probably made fun of me if I had ordered anything other than black hot coffee. And you and I sat and I asked you questions, and you had a gift for making complex things simple. And within 5 minutes of our conversation, I knew that eventually I was going to want you. I knew that God had given me a platform to allow you to share some of the wisdom that I desperately needed with other men as well. So that said, Jim, I'm just so thankful to you for your willingness and your vulnerability to be here. And I want God to lead us in this conversation because men need men like you. With that, again, welcome to the Being Sons podcast. And I guess the first question I have for you, Jim, is what are you most passionate about?
What I am most passionate about is becoming the true man that God created me to be through a relationship with his son, the truest man who ever lived. And to be a true man, not for myself, but for everybody that my life touches. Just as Jesus lived his life as the true son, the true man, whose life benefited everybody that his life touched. The reason we're even here today, because he did. I want to be that kind of man. and to communicate that to others. I believe there's no greater need in our churches and no greater need in our culture today than for men to be men. The men that our women need us to be, that our children need us to be, that our culture needs us to be, the people we work with need us to be. I think that is the greatest need today, because everything follows that, I believe.
I agree. And that's why my heart lit up being around you. I know I have things to learn from you. So, okay, that said, now.
I got a qualifier there, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let me offer your little qualifier. These words are so great. He says, Paul writes, "Consider your calling, my brethren. There are not many wise here, according to the flesh, not many noble, not many mighty. God has chosen the foolish ones of this world to shame the wise. He has chosen the weak ones of this world to shame the ones they think they're strong. He has chosen the nobodies of this world that he might show up the shallow pretensions of those who think they're somebody. It is by God's doing that we are in Christ Jesus, who has become to us wisdom from God and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that just as it is written, if anyone's going to get the applause around here, it's going to be Christ." So I like to say, if there's any good thing about my life, it'd be God's fault. Anything bad, I raise my hand and take the credit.
Well said. And that is the upside down nature of the kingdom, is that those who will humble themselves end up being the only ones that really have something worthwhile to say. Jim, just tell us a little bit about yourself, like your family, what you're doing right now. And then what I want to do is kind of go back and discover how you came to be where you are right now. So You can do all that in one fell swoop, but why don't you start with just who you are right now?
Well, presently, I am married to a wonderful woman named Julie. We've been married 26 years now. I have two sons by my first marriage. They're 42 and 40. Julie has three children by her first marriage, and we joined our families together when three of our kids were late teenagers, and I think anybody who's tried that knows that's a lot easier on paper than it is in practice. Anyway, we've been married for 26 years and happily so. Currently, I do serve as an elder in our church at Oak Hills Church here in San Antonio. Occasionally, once or twice a year, I'm usually asked to speak from the pulpit. Currently, I'm retired from my former profession of professional golf at the beginning, a professional golfer on the tour and a senior tour, but more than 40 years as a golf teacher. So I'm retired from that now. Currently, I find a lot of joy in leading groups of men. I have a group of men on Tuesday morning, another group of men on Wednesday morning. I'm a part of another group of men on Friday mornings. And then I have the honor of teaching a large class at Oak Hills on Sunday mornings. So, and then I'm able to meet with various men during the week. As I like to say, when we get together, we're here to grow together into the men that God created us to be, and Christ redeemed us to be, that Christ indwells us to be. And that's a great source of joy as well.
And I know you would never say this, but for those of you who are listening, when he says that occasionally has the opportunity to teach, he is a phenomenal teacher. And Oak Hills Church here in San Antonio is pastored primarily by Max Lucado, correct?
Well, he is our teaching and writing pastor. He's retired from senior minister. We have a gifted man named Travis Eads now, who's our senior minister. Okay,
wonderful. All that's to say is that that it takes a very gifted teacher to be invited up and to teach, because they are side by side with Max Lucado, who is an excellent, excellent storyteller and teacher, as most of you know. So
he sure is.
So how did you get where you are, Jim? Go back in your story and help us see the journey that you have taken to get where you are.
Well, there's kind of a good story, I think, that illustrates this pretty well. So the big commercial airliner takes off from the West Coast out over the Pacific Ocean. A couple hours into the flight, the captain comes onto the speaker and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have some good news and some bad news for you. Let me give you the bad news first. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just short-circuited. We have lost our complete instrument control panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no idea where we are, where we're going. We are going to eventually crash. The good news is we have a very strong tailwind, and we're making great time." And that was pretty much the story of my life. I was making great time, running from one good time to the next, but I was lost and I was going to crash. And coming to realize I was lost in life revealed itself through a pattern. The pattern was always the same. Even though I grew up in a non-religious home, my father was an atheist. I grew up kind of feeling like I had rock-hard convictions of what was right and wrong. And I would do the right things and I wouldn't do the wrong things. But I found as I progressed through life that every one of those rock-hard convictions would crumble into dust before me. Every one of them. I found recently, I found out what had happened to me is a Greek word called akrasia. Akrasia is the Greek term. It's a word that means the blinding of the conscience by repeated violation of it. And boy, was I ever involved in that process. Things I thought I could never do, I ended up doing, and then that ended up in worse things and worse things and worse things. And this was not a problem. In fact, I'll tell you what my life was like at this point. It was like what Paul wrote to the Ephesians. He says the Gentiles, they're confused in their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding because of their alienation from God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their hearts. And they, having become calloused, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. That was me. But then I crossed a line in life I thought I could never cross. This was one thing I knew I could never do. And that one thing was cheating on the golf course. So I'm playing professional golf. And it's 1976. At Horseshoe Bay here in Texas, in Marble Falls, on hole number 3. I hit a good tee shot. I went for the green on my second shot. I hit the ball out to the right. I walked up to the ball and I found it 1 foot out of bounds. I kicked the ball back in bounds. And when I kicked that ball back in bounds, for the first time in my life, I got scared. I had just crossed the one line in life I thought I could never cross, and now I knew there was no line I couldn't cross. And the things that were already going on in my head would become a reality. And that kind of stuff either gets you killed or put in jail. For the first time in my life, I came face to face with two powerful forces I had to acknowledge. One of them was guilt. I felt guilt for the wrong thing I had just done. But the other was more powerful. I felt shame. Shame being the feeling in me that there was something horribly wrong in me at the source of this wrong thing that I had done. And I knew I was in trouble, and there was no cure for me because I was what was wrong with me. So I experienced that. And then a few months later, excuse me, while playing the PGA Tour in 1977, we were in Memphis, Tennessee. Uh, and I remember going out for a run. I ran every day. I went out for a run. And at one point, I just fell to my knees. And I told God, I said, you can have this miserable life if you'll take it. It is a mess. If you'll take the mess of this life, you can have it. In Christ, I don't even know who you are, but I'm asking you to come, to live in me, to do in me whatever you want to do in me. And to my great surprise, he did. He did. I woke up the next day and there were new things about me that were not there before. Um, I had a desire to pick up a Bible and read it, and I'd never read it. To learn about this man I'd just given my life to. The other thing, I wanted to go find a Christian on the tour and understand something. The Christians out there knew I did not like them. I mocked them. In fact, I would say to them when I beat them, Lions won, Christians nothing.
Oh, man.
So I was like voted a least likely guy on the tour to become a believer. But I wanted to go find a believer. So I went and found this guy named Rick Massengate. And I said, Rick, you still got these tour Bible studies out here? He says, why do you want to know? I told him what had happened. He got really excited. And then third, it was like the blackboard of my life had been erased. I had a new beginning. I felt forgiven. And I had this sense of something powerful on the inside I had never experienced before. I can only call it joy. It was a joy, and it wasn't based on what I shot that day or what I was drinking or smoking or who I was with. It was something independent of all that. What I learned was all those things were new in me because a new someone came to live in me, making me new. Christ did, giving me his thoughts, his desires, his promptings, his motives. Life changed for me instantly at that moment. So that was the beginning of my life as a son of my Heavenly Father.
So how old were you at this point, Jim?
29 years old.
29. And so at this point, are you married?
Yes, I was married to the gal that was my first wife. We had early on, back in the early 70s, lived together for 2.5 years. We were swept away up in the cultural revolution that was happening at that time, the end of the 60s and early 70s. And you know, the part where the Jesus Revolution was happening.
Yeah.
If anybody's seen that movie,
yeah,
that's where we were. We got swept away and all that.
No, are you talking geographically you were there?
Pardon me?
Are you saying geographically you were there? Where were you living?
We were just all over the place.
Okay.
I'm just saying it was the same time frame as when all that happened.
Okay.
So yeah, we lived together for 2.5 years or so, and then finally, I don't know why we got married. We got married. and then, but interestingly enough, my first wife, she always thought she was a Christian. She went to church every Sunday, the Methodist church. She gave intellectual agreement to all the religious historical facts. She was what I would call a professing believer, but not a possessing believer. And then this happens to me, and she goes, I ain't got what you got. I ain't got in me what you got in you. And then about 5 or 6 months later, she went forward to become a possessing believer, someone who had actually engaged God on God's terms of relationship. And his terms of relationship are pretty simple. God says, I'm not a tight-fisted God who withholds anything from you. I will not use my fist to pound you into submission. I'm an open-handed, open-hearted God. I want to give all that I am and all that I have to you for your blessing and well-being. I will give my son for you. My son will give his life for you, but I can't give myself to this. I'd like to, but I can't. But if you'll open your life to me and give your whole heart to me, your whole life unconditionally, so now I can come into you and I will live in you and I will enrich your life with mine. In your life will become a God-rich blessing. My wife had never met God on those terms, only intellectual assent. But now by an act of her will, she surrendered to Christ to receive him. And so our marriage progressed on from there.
Your first wife?
Yes.
Okay, so this is not the story that we would expect, because
Right.
you got saved, she got saved,
Yeah.
and you guys ended up getting a divorce. I mean,
Yes.
would
Yeah.
you mind sharing about that?
Yeah. 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 We came back here to get involved in a great church, a great Bible teaching church, just terrific. And we were both growing. And my first wife would even say later, Jim, I don't even know what happened to me, but somewhere a switch flipped in me. And she just kind of went off the rails. And then for the next 9 years, our marriage faced the most difficult thing that a marriage could face. And I was going to hang in there no matter what. There's no way, but my two boys at the time were going to watch me walk out of the house or even divorce or anything like that. Uh, so this went on for 8 or 9 years, really tough years. Those were real learning years for me. I came to maybe talk about this later, but I came into a vastly different way of relating to God that has made a lot of difference. But anyway, after 21 years of marriage, my wife decided to leave our home. My boys were 13 and 15 at the time, and she left our home, and that left me as a single parent. And I was one of those for about a year and a half or so, and then uh, my my best friend's wife said, Jim, hey, if you'd ever like to take somebody out to go to a movie or something, I had never been out with anybody. She said, I bet Julie would go. Well, Julie went to the same church. I didn't know her very well. I knew her husband better, but her husband had run off on her too. And so I took her out one time for dinner, and that was that. I fell madly in love with Julie. She's just the most delightful, beautiful gal. And so we just had a great experience for the last 26 years.
That's amazing. Thank God. Thank God. What is your first wife's name?
Jane Ann.
Jane Ann. Well, Lord, we just bless Jane Ann and her story and
Yeah.
her journey right now. I'm sure that was so tough. And that's, that's one of those things, Jim, that's so confusing, is that, many people believe that things just get easy, and that if two people, are possessed by the Lord, that it's all going to work out. And so I just appreciate you sharing that all stories are not simple. And
no, there ain't nothing simple about being human.
Yeah. Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for pausing for a moment just to help us see that piece of your story a little bit more. So, yeah, would you just continue from there?
Well, continuing from there, what year was that? 1995. Julie and I married in end of 1997, I think it was. And so Julie was a professor at the Incarnate Word University here, a math professor. In fact, she was halfway through her PhD in math at University of Texas when we met. I talked her getting right out of that one. So anyway, she was doing so to gain tenure. And as I mentioned, I was a golf professional. I was at the time teaching golf, but I had qualified to play the PGA Senior Tour, Champions Tour as it's known today. And so at 1999, Julie quit her job and we took off to play the PGA Senior Tour. I did that for a year. Found out I didn't like it very much, honestly. So anyway, I came back to teaching golf, and Julie went on to teach math at a junior school here in town. And so we continued from there, and that's and that brings us to where we are today.
I have heard you articulate. That's my word today. Articulate. I have heard you talk about sonship a lot from the very first time that we met. And frankly, I know that's not a new category. That's like an ancient category. That is what the gospel ultimately is all about. It's the story of a father who's built a home and whose sons and daughters have run away, and it's about him taking the one faithful son and saying, would you go back, and would you pay the price, and would you redeem them and invite them back home so that they can live as a well-fathered child. And that has been my rescue. But I had not heard anybody in your stage really talk about sonship. So my question for you is, where did sonship become a category for you?
It became a felt reality for me. Pretty much towards the middle of the really difficult years that I was having in my first marriage. I remember waking up one day after a particularly difficult night before. And I woke up every day to spend time with God every morning. And so I got up this particular day, and I'll never forget, I sat there looking at all the books in front of me, reference books, commentaries, Bibles, different books. And a question just popped into my head. I don't know if you ever had that happen. A thought just pops in like out of nowhere. You didn't invite it in, it just showed up. And it was this thought: Jim, you have a head full of truth, but are you any better for it? People certainly might respect you for what you know, but are they drawn to you for who you are? Is there a warmth about you, or is it just cold, hard truth that people experience when with you? That question put me in my seat. That one did. And I realized that I had a greater need of God than just the intellectual truth that I had. I was kind of in a church where it was implied that information equals transformation. The more you know, the better you'll be. But the truth I knew didn't seem to be working very well at this point, and I needed something else. My prayers changed that morning. To God, I don't need to know more. I've got enough of that. It doesn't seem to be working anyway. I need to know something of your love, Father. You've got to teach me about your love. You've got to teach me to love and what that means. And so that morning, God began to answer that prayer. He did it in a couple of ways, actually. But he began to answer that prayer. And as a consequence, I got introduced to the love of the Father. The love of the Father poured out into the life of the Son, who poured his love out to me through his Spirit, through whom God's love has been poured out into my heart. I began to learn of that. Excuse me. And one of the writers that helped me more than anybody on this, in fact, I would say this writer changed my whole notion of God. His name is George MacDonald. George MacDonald was, as C.S. Lewis said, he is my spiritual master. I've never concealed the fact that George MacDonald is my spiritual master. He said that the debt I owe to George MacDonald for his writings is greater than any debt that a man could owe to another man. And he's shaped my message and my teaching so much, I don't think I've ever written anything I did not quote from him. My view of God, I think, is pretty common today. It was best expressed. It was best expressed. My grandson put it this way. And he said exactly what I'd always believed about God. So we're sitting there, he's 11 or 12 years old, and we just said grace at dinner. And, and he said, and my grandson said something about God. And I said, so what do you think of God? And he goes, God, he just wants all the attention. That was my view of God. Praise me, worship me, sing to me, give to me, glorify me, me. My view of God was that God was somewhat of a self-centered God. After all, I want you to do all this. Love me, praise me, sing to me, give to me, glorify me. And guess what I became? The greatest oxymoron there could be. I became a self-centered Christian. But then I read George MacDonald. I read something by him. And when I read this, I go, holy mackerel. My view of God has been upside down this whole time. My view of God is not what God is like at all. It's exactly the opposite. So let me see if I could just quote part of this. So he writes in his book, Unspoken Sermons. And by the way, this book, if you try to read it, you better get your big boy pants on, because this is hard reading. I'm telling you, it's hard reading.
It's very hard reading, yes.
But he says in this part of what he says in this first chapter, child in the midst. What is the kingdom of Christ? It is a rule of truth and of love and of service. And the great king is the chief servant in his kingdom. I went, what? I thought I was the one who's supposed to serve you. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life. My Father is working until now, and I myself am working. The great workman is the great king, laboring for his own. Went, what? You laboring for me? The devotion of God to his creatures is perfect. Wait a minute. I thought it was my devotion to you that mattered. Your devotion to me? The devotion of God to his creatures is perfect. He does not think about himself. He thinks about them. What? Your nature is to think about me, not about yourself. He finds his blessedness in the outgoing of blessedness to us. He gives his life for us. Shall we not draw near to him in the abandonment of faith and give ourselves to him who gave himself for us and love all whom he loves? When I read that, I went, that's true. That is true. And when I began to see God the Father in this way, this self-giving God who is self-giving for the well-being of the objects of his love, the Father who gave his Son, and the Son who gave his life for us. And then when this is what I learned in those, this is what God taught me. This may sound a little contrary, all right? This is kind of deep a little bit. Let me see if I can express it this way. That very morning that I had prayed that prayer, I was reading in the Gospel of John. And I read these words spoken by Jesus. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. I went, a new commandment? A new commandment? Well, if there's a new commandment, what is the old one? Well, I knew what the old one was, so I turned back to Matthew 22 and read it. What is the greatest commandment? The scribe asks. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbors yourself. That's the old commandment. And Jesus says, I'm giving you a new commandment. And I looked the word up, new. It's kainos. It means new, not known before. Qualitatively new, not known before. And because it's new, it's better. And I learned something very important here. In the old commandment, it was all up to me. It was up to me to love God, up to me to love my neighbor. Jesus says, as I've loved you, love one another. Then he goes on to say this, As the Father's loved me, I've loved you. Abide in my love. The new commandment found a different source. God the Father was the source, poured out to the Son, who poured out his love to us, motivating us and equipping us and empowering us to love as he loves. I came to know the love of the Father whose primary nature is self-giving love for the well-being of his creatures to be poured out to us. That changed everything for me. And God took me into the schoolhouse of love to learn to love as my Father loves me. And Jesus would pray this. Listen to this. Father, I'm going to make it known that the love that the Father has for me will be in you and I will be in you. I go, wow, I can live with that. The Son living in me, loving me, motivating me, empowering me to love as he loves, as the Father has loved him. That drew me to the heart of the Father, to see him, as it were, for the first time in the true light of who he is.
I would love to round this first part of our conversation by asking you just a simple question. Can you feel that love in you today at this stage in your life?
Not always, no. I don't have to feel it because I got something way better than feeling. I know it. I know it with sunrise certainty. This is something I know. Don't have to feel it.
And how do you
It's
know
nice
it?
when I do. But I'm not a real feeling kind of guy anyway, right? No, because a long time ago in my life, and we could talk about this at some point, I snipped the wires to my feelings, right? My shame was so deep. I just had to snip the wires to my feelings so I didn't feel things. In fact, I remember telling my dog when I was about 12, I wished I could be you and I wish you were me because you don't feel the things inside that I feel. So I've asked God to reconnect the wires, but no, it's just something. What did John say in his first letter in 4:16? And we have come to know and believe the love that God has for us. Not feel it, we've come to know it.
Jim, thank you for sharing those pieces of your story. It's pure gold, and I think that most of our listeners are left asking a bunch more questions. So would you be willing to join us for another conversation about whatever questions? Well, would you be willing to continue this conversation?
Be a joy. Yeah, that
All right.
would be
Great.
great.
Okay. Friends, thank you very much. And just so you know, we are about to open up some slots for the First Tracks and First Bloom Father-Son, Father-Daughter Adventures in the spring of 2024. We keep expanding enrollment to these adventures, and then they keep filling up. So if you're listening, if you've got a son between 9 and 13 years old, want to encourage you, please come join us for an adventure that is really going to help bond you and your son together, and also just kind of illuminate this incredible gift that we are being offered of sonship. If you've got a daughter between 7 and 13, we host an adventure for you, Dad, called First Bloom, and they're held here in San Antonio, Texas, or outside San Antonio, Texas, in a beautiful place in the hill country called Rock Springs. So that's just a few of the things that we have going on, and we will see you on the other side of this conversation with Jim Barker. Again, thanks, Jim.